Everybody, happy Friday morning or Thursday evening, or a very early morning if you're in Europe. This is our final presentation this morning, and I've got Damien Manuel on board. We live in a world where all people, businesses and government need to be educated about risks of cyber attack and data theft, and I think that's been evident in a lot of the discussions we've had throughout this morning, as well as the European and American meetings as well. That we need to take all the reasonable precautions to protect ourselves and protect our customers. As a nationally recognised peak body for cybersecurity professionalism, the Australian Information Security Association champions the development of robust information security sector by building the capacity of professionals, advancing in cybersecurity, safety of the Australian public, as well as business and government. Now, I've had the privilege of working closely with Damien about, I would say, nearly 20 years ago at a service provider. We've been in contact for a long time, and a very, very smart individual. So Damien's going to talk to us about what is our obligation. We always hear about what they're doing in Europe. We always hear about what they're doing in America, but what should we be doing here in Australia? So Damien, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, everybody. Probably skip to the next slide, and we'll have a discussion around, where are we at present, and what are sort of some of the big issues that we're dealing with. So we've seen a rapid rate and increase in cyber criminals targeting organisations, and in particular in Australia, individuals. We're seeing an increase in technology being used to speed up the actual attack process, with a lot of these attacks now available as services that you can buy off the shelf, off the internet. And effectively, that means that anybody now can potentially become a cyber criminal that's attacking an organisation, an individual, or a country. We're seeing IT assets and system complexity dramatically increase in organisations, and as that's increasing, it's also reducing the resilience of those organisations. We're being challenged by new technologies that are going to really impact and have consequential downsides in terms of how we interact as a society, but also how businesses also interact as well. And in Australia, we've seen major data breaches over the last 12 months, including Optus, Medibank, and the most recent sort of major one being Latitude Financial. They won't be the last. Watch this space. There'll be more breaches to come. Some of the challenges that we're really kind of got to deal with and grapple with from a business community perspective is the rapid growth in ransomware. And we've seen ransomware change from just trying to block an information or block the availability of information in an organization, to switching to stealing that information and holding organizations to ransom that they will release that information publicly. We're also seeing a rapid exploitation sort of landscape where, as we add more and more systems and software and IoT devices and SCADA systems, the attack surface is effectively increasing, and there's more and more vulnerabilities that are being discovered. And there's a budding sort of business aspect on the side where people can actually look for vulnerabilities these days, find those vulnerabilities and sell them to different organizations, and in some cases to on the criminal black market. The other aspect that we're seeing a rapid rise is business email compromises, and that's where invoices are basically being altered and manipulated to trick organizations into paying scammers or criminal syndicates the money, rather than actually paying your third party that you might have been procuring a service from as well. So in that sort of context, on average, we're seeing 2.5 data breaches per day in the Australian market last year. Some of those breaches have been caused through criminal attacks, so about 70% of those. 5% are generally due to system faults, so misconfigurations, and then 25% are really sort of human error. So, making sure, for example, you've got test APIs in the case of Optus exposed to the wider internet and not being protected properly. That would be the kind of scenario where you're likely to have a human error resulting in a massive amount of data being released. Collectively, the losses are estimated to be in the order of around about $42 billion, which is just increasing year on year. From a statistical perspective, 1 in 3 Australians now has been a victim of some type of cybercrime. 2/3 of the Australian population has had their personal information lost through a data breach in the last 12 months. And even, if you look at the cybersecurity profession, even though they should know better and they know the tactics that are used, we're seeing about an 8% of cybersecurity professionals that are falling victims to scams. So that goes to show you the level of sophistication and complexity that scammers are using to trick people into providing either financial transfers or providing account details that they're using to then further exploit organizations or individuals. On average, you're expecting to see a cybercrime reported to the federal government every 6 minutes. We believe that that number is underrepresented, mainly because a lot of people don't know where to go to report cybercrimes. So if we look at, who is actually attacking the Australian landscape, businesses, communities, and government, and it varies quite greatly. So it could be anything anywhere from what we call script kiddies, which are really the vandals on the internet. These individuals are really unskilled. They're leveraging tools that they're acquiring and buying off the internet and using those to attack individuals and organizations. Now, even though they're an unskilled sort of adversary, do not discount them. If I think about an organisation that was about to sell for about $14 million in Australia, that organisation was basically destroyed overnight by a retired truck driver who decided to, buy some tools off the internet and have a bit of fun attacking an Australian organisation. So anybody can really cause serious harm and damage to organisations, individuals, and to some government systems, depending on the tools that they're buying as well. The next category is terrorism. We're starting to see terrorism pick up a little bit in terms of the acquisitions of tools. Currently, I would say they're not a major threat for Australian businesses and for the Australian government, but it is something to watch as tools become more sophisticated online and it becomes easier to acquire those tools as well. The next group really is hacktivists. They're motivated by political, social justice causes, and in some cases, environmental protection reasons. Really, hacktivists are a loose collection of individuals who basically have varying skill levels and will target organizations that could be based in coal, oil, government agencies. Sometimes it can be politically motivated, where the Australian government might have a downturn in terms of relationships with a particular country, and then we'll see organisations in Australia with the name National, Australia or Commonwealth in their names attacked by these hacktivist groups as well. The next one to sort of think about are sort of creative exploiters. These are really individuals that are motivated by curiosity. They're got an interest in understanding how a system works. They're keen to find flaws and vulnerabilities, and really, rather than being an adversary, these sort of individuals tend to be your allies. So they'll often sort of report faults or vulnerabilities that they find and submit those to the organizations to get them resolved. You can think of Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, who co-founded Apple, as creative exploiters, where they were hacking the telephone systems back in the day to look at ways to exploit telephone system networks and get free phone calls. Another sort of one that I'd sort of categorize, there's two gentlemen, Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek, who hacked the Jeep Cherokee in the US. That was a side project that they thought they'd look at investigating to see how quickly they could hack into a car. As a result of what they found, that caused a recall of 1.4 million vehicles across the globe. The next one that I'd sort of categorize as your sort of threat within an organization is going to be your trusted insider. Now, your trusted insider, I'd break into 4 different sort of groups. One where you've got an individual who really doesn't understand what they're doing, and I'd put them into sort of the negligent bucket. They're untrained, they'll make mistakes, they don't have attention to detail. Then you've got your other type of trusted insider where, for ethical reasons, they may not agree with the position that the company's taking or the organization or the government agency, and as a result, disclose information or steal information. Then you've got those that are the malicious insider. So that would be an individual who thinks they're doing a great job in the company, should be paid more. Maybe they got passed over for a promotion. Maybe they didn't get their bonus. And so there's a bit of an axe to grind with the organization. And so those individuals would be looking to monetize information that they're stealing from the organization, or to disrupt the organization in some way. Then you've got the other type of trusted insider, which would really be somebody who, might have a gambling debt, might have family problems, may have gotten themselves into a situation where they're being blackmailed. And so these are the individuals that are vulnerable from an espionage perspective. And often they've got pressure put on them from criminal syndicates or from other foreign entities, and even sometimes foreign companies, to act as an insider to steal information on an organization or pass that information on. In some cases, we are seeing individuals apply for jobs in companies, and those individuals are applying not to really work in that organization, but to act as a malicious insider or to act from an espionage perspective. Your probably biggest ones to consider are criminal syndicates. So these are organized crime gangs. They operate across the globe. Some are local in Australia, some are international. What's so serious about these crime syndicates is that the crime syndicates work hand in some cases with governments of certain countries in certain jurisdictions. So they're either trading and exchanging the tools with those foreign governments, or they're under the protection of those foreign governments. So it makes it very difficult to persecute, find them, track them down, and bring them to justice. Criminal syndicates really have modernized the tools that are available and really commercialize the options for different criminal syndicates to buy software. So think of these crime syndicates as forming markets where they're exchanging tools, vulnerabilities, and technology to basically subvert security systems in a lot of organizations. Your most serious one is going to be your state-sponsored. Now, your state-sponsored threat actor, they're motivated obviously through political influence. Sometimes they're looking at disrupting systems. They might be looking at ways to increase trade or disrupt trade or get a negotiation advantage with a particular country. So they're really interested in stealing data, IP, and sometimes from a monetary perspective as well. So state-sponsored also has a new thing that we started to see during the election when Trump was running against Hillary Clinton. In that aspect, we were really sort of thinking about the fact that some of these state-sponsored actors were using misinformation mechanisms to disrupt democratic societies. Some of the probably most active state-sponsored threat actors, I'd say, would be China, North Korea, and some other countries as well, such as the Brazilian sort of region, and even some sort of operatives working out of countries like Cambodia and some of the African nations as well. So what are the key sort of mechanisms that these sort of organizations are really using to steal information, data, or money from organizations? And so you've got to think about breaking it into three sort of distinct channels. You've got your physical channel firstly. So, that could be in person, it could be going through physical mail, it could be going through IT assets that are being disposed of or being removed from an organization. It could be through all kinds of devices, whether it's laptops, mobile devices, tablets, and things like that. And it can even be something as simple as cables. If you've ever thought about borrowing a charger to charge a phone, would highly recommend not doing that. You can basically buy cables that look identical to Android cables or iPhone cables online for about $110 US. Those cables can actually be embedded with malware and remote code execution, which means as soon as you plug it into your device, it'll actually execute code and compromise the security of that device, whether it be a phone or a laptop or a tablet of some sort. And the other thing to sort of really focus on is, device management is critical and IT asset management is critical. I used to work for one of the big four banks in Australia. Did an audit of one of the data centers where the bank housed some of the equipment, and was shocked to discover that there were old servers that were being decommissioned, sitting on a pallet in a warehouse in a unprotected area of the data center, ready to be removed and disposed. But anybody could have walked in, grabbed those devices, extracted the hard drives, and removed the contents and used the contents that were on those hard drives. The other sort of mechanism that is commonly used is digital channels. So organizations will spend millions of dollars protecting the boundary of that organization, whether it be through firewalls, all kinds of security systems. And it's very easy to attack an organization using an email that's been manipulated, carrying what's called a malicious payload. Another channel is using social networking to understand who's who within an organization. Once you understand who's who, you can target individuals a lot easier. The weakest part of an organization from a division perspective would be human resources and accounting departments. The website and the intranet is also another mechanism that's used to compromise. Advertising, so whenever you've gone to a website, you've seen the banner advertising on the side. One of the trends is to basically publish legitimate looking advertising, and then over a period of time change that link that you would click on to a malicious website. And what you find is just by clicking on that link and going to that malicious website, devices like Windows endpoints can be easily compromised without the user doing anything from an intervention perspective. The other avenue of attack is voice and SMS. There are commercial tools that you can buy that you can push payloads to mobile phones. The end user doesn't have to actually click on anything on the mobile phone, and you can actually compromise that mobile phone. Once you've compromised that device, you've got the ability to then sort of monitor what that user's doing, capture keystrokes, and then sort of use information from a collection perspective as well. The other sort of really common aspect is what I'd call process manipulation, and that's really sort of hijacking accounts, getting in between common processes that a business might use in B2B transactions or even B2C transactions as well. It's very common to see what we call account hijacking. This is where, for example, you might have staff in your organization. They might have a number of different services that they're using online. They might be shopping at Kohl's or through some sort of provider like Amazon. And then what they're doing is they're using the same credentials that they would have used for their corporate network. So using the same passwords. And effectively, if one of those entities that they're using is compromised, effectively the attackers now have a list of individuals, the common passwords that they're using, and then they'll try and use those against corporate accounts. And in a lot of times, they'll be quite successful. The other sort of process manipulation aspect, you'd think of it from a system compromise perspective, looking for specific vulnerabilities, or social engineering individuals as well. Getting into any organization these days, you can completely subvert most of the protection systems if you focus on the social engineering sort of aspect. It's quite easy to walk into an organization, pretend to be an individual that is meant to be in that organization, and it's quite often that people will just sort of wave you through and give you access to systems. There's a famous hacker, her name's Paula J. She will quite happily talk about the fact that she uses her appearance to break into organizations. Even by getting into the lift with an individual, she'll say to somebody, good to see you again, you're looking better. Which immediately creates this sort of relationship where the individual thinks, I must know you, and they're too embarrassed to acknowledge that they don't. And so often they'll pass her through and badge her into secure areas as well. The other sort of aspect as well, which is sort of a key mechanism for cybercrime and identity theft, is really that human error aspect. So consider both the physical channel, digital channel, process manipulation, and the human error aspect. One thing that I didn't mention on the slide when I was talking about the threat actors is you also need to consider your third-party suppliers. If you look at the most recent sort of big data breach in Australia, which was with Latitude Financial, it wasn't Latitude Financial that was directly responsible for that data breach. It was their managed service provider that they used that basically didn't have proper authentication on the accounts that they were using to access the Latitude Financial systems. I used to work for a university. That particular university used a third party to send messages to students. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was they weren't using multi-factor authentication with that third party. A criminal basically stole credentials from a staff member of that university, discovered that they could use those credentials to access that third party. And then once they accessed that third party, they effectively had access to about 65,000 student records and details. So always think about your supply chain. If you have really good security practices in place, It could be that the supply chain that you're using doesn't, or you might be part of a supply chain for a larger organization. And so you'll definitely be a target for criminals to access that larger organization that you're acting as part of that supply chain. Another organization that I used to work for, which was RSA. RSA was one of the sort of world's big global vendors for the RSA security tokens. There was a particular foreign government that was very interested in putting a backdoor into those security tokens because those security tokens are quite often used by defense contractors. And so that foreign entity was interested in basically getting access to defense systems to steal intellectual property and additional sort of information for an intel perspective. What they did very cleverly was they decided we're going to attack Adobe systems, which produces a lot of PDF software, a lot of sort of graphic design systems. It's one of the most common sort of readers, if you like, for portable document formats, which is PDFs. So they attacked Adobe systems and they stole the source code from Adobe systems to look for a vulnerability within that source code that nobody has discovered before. They then identified a vulnerability. They then targeted RSA, mapped the organization using social media to understand who was who within the organization, particularly around the human resource department. They crafted a fake email. They embedded an Excel spreadsheet in that fake email with the malicious code that they discovered was a vulnerability within the Adobe software that is used by a lot of organizations, and then sent that to the HR department. So if you think about a global multinational company that is the #1 sort of leader at the time in cybersecurity services and authentication tokens, was basically brought to its knees by somebody in Queensland, Australia, clicking on the email that executed the vulnerability and gave that foreign government access to corporate systems. Once they had access to the corporate systems, they then moved what's called laterally through the organization, going from device to device to device, looking for a mechanism or a way to alter those tokens in the manufacturing productions area. So, don't think that if you're a small organization that you're not going to be a target. You could be a target because you're part of a larger supply chain, and maybe they're not targeting you specifically, but you might be the channel for them to get into that other organization. So what's happening as a result of all these sort of issues and changes from these major attacks, particularly in Australia? So the Australian government released a paper basically announcing that they're going to do a change to the cybersecurity strategy. So they're looking at making Australia one of the most cyber secure nations in the world. So they're looking at a long-term change, starting from this year up to 2030. The previous strategies really focused on increasing Australia's internal defence aspects. This is a change that's looking at increasing the resilience of businesses in Australia and critical infrastructure as well. Some of those changes are going to include, rolling up a lot of the cybersecurity legislation into a single cybersecurity act. So very similar to the way that we've got the Privacy Act, we'll have a cybersecurity act. Director obligations in terms of their responsibility for ensuring adequate protection of organizations is going to be bolstered. You're going to start seeing sort of civil action occurring, which we're already starting to see from the Optus and Medibank breaches, where we've got class actions against those organisations, and the government's talking about also dramatically increasing regulatory fines in that space. Now we're expecting the strategy to be released sometime in early October. And once that strategy comes out, it will lay forward the foundations in terms of government investment and strategic plans and the number of sort of legislative elements that they're going to modify as well. One of the other things that sort of recently has completed and is starting to kick off is critical infrastructure legislation. Australia has now designated 11 sectors as critical infrastructure. So in the past, typically we would have thought of banking and finance as a critical infrastructure sector. We would have considered telecommunications as a critical infrastructure sector. So there are new ones now, including data storage and processing facilities, higher education and research, energy, food and grocery. So the major grocery stores, Woolworths and Coles in Australia, are considered critical infrastructure now. Healthcare and medical, space technology, transport, and water and sewerage are now considered critical infrastructure as well. Outside of those 11 sectors are 22 assets that are also deemed critical infrastructure as well. So for those sectors, it means that they need to uplift their cybersecurity obligations. It also means that anybody providing services to those 11 sectors also needs to consider uplifting their cybersecurity obligations. So you're going to get this cascading down sort of effect where, the obligation is solely and squarely, for example, on Coles or Woolworths, but anybody that supplies Coles or Woolworths will be caught up in that net and need to uplift their cybersecurity as well. The federal government's taking a risk-based approach, so understanding that not all sectors and all assets can move in terms of maturity at the same time. When you think about banks have had 20 years to ensure that they've been highly resilient to cyber attacks, and they've got teams between 300 to 600 people that are dedicated to cybersecurity. If I look at one of the newer sectors that's been classified as critical, such as higher education, most universities typically would only have maybe 2 to 3 people dedicated to cybersecurity in their entire organization. We are starting to see some more advanced ones, getting up to the numbers around about 30 staff that are dedicated to cybersecurity. But when you consider the data that those universities are protecting in terms of new research, the organizations that they're working with on that research, commercial organizations, and then all the individual endpoints that they've got to manage, where they might have a population of students of anywhere from 65,000 to 150,000, and you compare that to a bank which is really only managing 40,000 endpoints, you can see that there's a big difference in terms of funding and resources able to deal with cybersecurity matters and issues. So, we are going to see over time those areas increase in maturity, and the government's aware of that. And so it's really taking this risk-based approach to ensure that they're helping to support them, providing them with additional intelligence, but they're expecting those organisations to uplift over the next few years. There's a grace period at the moment for 6 months that started from the 17th of February. And so you'll start to see organisations post that 6-month period really being expected to ratchet up at a faster rate as the government sort of pushes forward with ensuring that critical infrastructure is more resilient. We're also going to see changes to the Privacy Act. Those changes are likely to be, moving closer towards a GDPR-style privacy regime within the country. We're also going to see the removal of the $3 million exemption. So if you're a business that had a turnover of less than $3 million, you are exempt from the Privacy Act. That's going to sort of disappear. You'll start to see a move where data is no longer being considered an asset by organizations, to data starting to be thought of as really now a liability. Do you need to have that data? If you don't need to have that data, reduce the liability of the organization and look at a way to kind of remove that data. There's also going to be sort of more obligations really around data disposal and data handling. Some of the things to also consider from a government perspective is the government in Australia, in light of the Optus Medibank sort of issues, they're now thinking about the fact that we really need in Australia a centralised identity platform where the government can act as a broker for managing identification of individuals rather than companies collecting all that information, such as driver's license, passport details, and the such. And so, we're likely to see a identity platform stood up over the next couple of years where businesses can basically opt to connect in and use that as a way to identify individuals as well. One of the sort of key things I really want you to sort of take away from sort of today is, data and sort of information has dramatically changed to, what we considered in the past, where it was about hoarding as much information because maybe we can monetize that information and use it, and, maybe there'll be some benefit to the organization. But really, data has changed dramatically, particularly post-COVID, with the rapid digitalization of a lot of organizations sort of moving to online systems. Data really can be monetized by criminals. It can be monetized by foreign governments. Data has an aspect where it can be used as a weapon against organizations. And, data can also give certain individuals, organizations, and governments power. So if you think about some of the challenges that we're going to sort of really face into over the next 12 to 24 months is particularly around the rise of artificial intelligence systems. So most of you on the call have probably, or on this talk, have heard of ChatGPT. That's what they call a large language model. That kind of system is now going to really dramatically change business and society. And how that's going to change business and society is, you think about Russia and what they used to have termed the troll farms for internet manipulation of social media systems. And that was, basic sort of, think of basic bots that were basically, re-pushing information or quotes that were a form of misinformation. Now with these large language models, you can basically replace a really primitive sort of bot type chat system with something very sophisticated that can actually emulate and trick people into thinking that it's a human. So we're going to start seeing information appearing on all these social networks and in the media where we don't know if that information is actually true or false. Some of the biggest challenges with these artificial intelligence systems, and in particular large language models, is they suffer from what's called hallucinations. And so a hallucination is where the system basically generates by itself information which is misleading, false, or inaccurate. There's been a famous case recently of a particular individual in academia where the system has basically said that that individual had been, charged with sexual abuse crimes, etc. It basically provided citations and it provided articles from the New York Times. The trouble was that all that information was made up. None of it was real. And so we're now rapidly moving into this era where how do you trust the information and the data that you're getting? Is it something that is fake? What's the provenance of that data? Where was the source? Where did it come from? Do we trust it? And then when you think about, as we move from these large language models, which are really just sort of text-based communications, to what's called deep fakes, and the ability for anybody to start creating deep fakes, which is basically creating video and audio sort of presentations or real-time sort of video feeds. For example, what you're seeing on the screen in terms of me talking in the future can easily be created by an automated system. And it can sound like me, it can say things that I would never say, but how are you to know that it was actually, me, or whether it was, something that was generated by an adversary, a foreign government, or just an individual having fun? So we're going to have these challenges in the future around, data in terms of what's real, what's not real, and what do we trust. And of course, the other challenge is really how do we deal with this data explosion? Because, there is so much data that we're generating every day. We're generating more data every year than the previous, 10 years. So you think about that information, it's getting captured on, mobile devices, printers, IoT devices that we connect in our homes or in our businesses. And we really haven't given a lot of thought as a society in terms of how do we safely destroy that information or remove it from those systems. With the explosion of IoT, which are cheap devices that are connected to the internet, think of them as different sensors that might give you different benefits, whether it's turning the lights on in your home remotely on your phone, turning your PowerPoints on and off, all those kinds of devices that are connected to the internet now. When you reset that device, is that data that was on that device really gone? And some of that data might be, data that is sensitive. It could be data about you as an individual. It could be data about your habits, your usage of those devices. And so now we really need to think about society in terms of, how do we manage data both from a trust perspective, but also removing that data when it's no longer of use and ensuring that it's securely stored if we do need to keep it.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. What did I take away from that? I think 2 slides ago, there was 3 pillars that you mentioned there, Damien, physical, digital, and process. And what I found interesting that whilst we're talking about security and obligation, each of those pillars was relevant to the presentations held before. So I think from a perspective of what's our obligation, well, there's a lot of directors on this call that own businesses in Australia. They're not exempt anymore. And there's also a lot of companies that have shareholders that wish to have board members that are also responsible to ensure that, us as those that are working in IT, we understand our accountability, but educate the customer. And if there's serious considerations, which, as you said before, there's class actions going on with what we've seen in the media, it raises that relevance of ourselves back to our customers to ensure that we are doing the right thing. I know from my perspective, staff that I hire now will have a form of security background or have a common understanding of what cybersecurity is. That's because it nearly comes into every conversation in an engineering or in a management perspective, that the opportunity that they create through their conversation, it builds businesses and it mitigates risk. So thank you, Damien, for taking time out of your busy day. If anybody has any questions, please email myself and I'll forward through to Damien. He's here to help. Like I said, a very, very well-educated, smart individual that's been around the traps for a very long time. So I'm honoured to have him as part of this, and I hope you got value out of that presentation. Thank you, Damien.
All right, thanks, Brett.
Damien, that was really fantastic. Except you scared the hell out of me. I'm afraid now to use anybody's cell phone charger.
Do you not use a cell phone charger that you get from anybody else?
I mean, a lot of times, I'm at a bar, and my phone dies, and I go to the bartender and I say, "Can I use your cell phone charger?" How did I know that they were stealing my data?
Yep. Yeah, it's very common now. And the fact that it's so cheap to buy, and it's commercially available for people to exploit sort of mobile devices. Do not use anybody's cable charger, and even things like passes that you might have to go into your office. Really keep those in a safe place. Don't sort of leave them lying around. Apart from somebody being able to physically steal it. You can buy a device now which is called a flipper. It's sold as if it was a kid's toy, and basically it's a device that can very quickly clone within a few seconds that card as well.
Yeah, you went on for about 40 minutes and did not stop. I mean, you went threat after threat after threat. Yeah, just amazing. I actually manage a group of hosted telecommunications providers, and a lot of them were recently, at the end of last year, were attacked with denial of service attacks, and I think that's what you were referring to. For the rest of you folks who are on this call, you can go into the dark web and you can actually contract somebody to say a denial of service attack. All that is you make a bunch of requests to a server, so much so that it crashes the server. And so if you're, I don't want to give anybody ideas, but if you're a student in a school and it's the day of your exam, you can go to the dark web and you can pay a couple $100 and have them just crash the server at the school, and they'll call off school. I wish they had that when I was back in school.
and exactly what you said, it is literally a couple $100. It doesn't cost much these days to cause disruption for organizations.
Yeah. So thank you. It was really an eye opener. I do appreciate it.
Thank you, Damien.
Brett, closing comments?
I just would like to thank everybody that attended. It was an early morning or a late night, and look, I really do apologise that you had to stare at my head for so long. So that is a sincere apology, because I'd hate to be doing that myself. I'd like to thank all our speakers that did attend. we did try to cover off. Look, it is all about sustainability. It is all about the circular economy, but there's so many facets that that tie into that. It's all about changing the conversation. It's not just about buying hardware and selling hardware anymore. It's what is that hardware doing and what's going to happen to it. And if none of those presentations that were made today you thought were relevant, I disagree. I believe they are. And so hopefully everybody that attended will walk away with a little bit more information. Contact Joe or myself if you want any follow-up. And I wish you all a fantastic weekend and thank you for your attendance.
Thank you too, Brett. And Brett, I want to thank you too for putting this together. It's not easy. I know the time it takes to put an event like this together. So I really want to thank you for your time, your dedication. Also, echoing what you said, I want to thank the speakers. Steve Mellons, he was up at, I think it was midnight in the UK when he was presenting. Roger was late in the US. Chris from Blanco, a great partner, folks. If you're looking for a data sanitization partner, Blanco, Chris is the one you want to reach out to. And the Professor Vina, I mean, she opened my head is spinning about the ideas of how we can turn junk into gold. And as I said before, Damien, you scared the heck out of us. So I'm not sure that's good or bad. But seriously, this is a time of opportunity for our industry. End users are being driven to do business with companies that can offer data security, data sanitization, and guarantee that the products that we're dealing with don't end up in landfills. ITADs from around the world are looking for partners, downstream partners all around the world. There aren't a heck of a lot of certified ITADs yet in Asia Pacific, which means that all the certified ITADs who are looking for downstream partners are looking for partners to do business with in Australia. So there's a ton of opportunity out there in our industry, more than I think I've ever seen in a lot of years. I urge you to take advantage of it. If you have any questions, anything that went on today, whether it's becoming a certified ITAD or anything else, feel free to reach out to Brett or myself. That's what we're here for. Last thing, on your portal, you'll see there's a button that says networking. If you want to get a 3-minute go around with everybody who's here at the event, click on the networking button. You'll get 3-minute one-on-one with everybody. Give you a chance to say hello, goodbye to everybody. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is really the end of our trip around the world today. And Brett, thank you for making this a great, safe landing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And just a quick thank you to our sponsors and James for your assistance.
Oh, yeah. Good point on the sponsors too. I did have a slide to thank them. Yeah, the sponsors, thank you guys. Thank you for your financial support, your time, and your dedication and your membership in ASCDI. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I'll see you all in the networking session. And Karen, thank you for your help too.